Well, I did another day of Social Security disability exams this past week, and I'm going to talk about 8 problems that I've noticed and one person who really got things right at their exam. Hello, I'm John Foster. I'm a medical doctor who does Social Security disability exams. I've done over 1,500, and as always, everything I say reflects my own opinions based on my own experience and study, and not the opinions of the Social Security Administration. Now, the first problem is short exams. I have had a viewer comment that they'd had a psychological evaluation that had only taken 5 minutes. I don't do psychological evaluations, but I'm familiar with them. And there's no way anybody can do a psychological evaluation or a consultative examination for Social Security disability in 5 minutes. They're simply cheating, and if that happens to you, you should immediately complain to Social Security and request a second exam. Some patients take a bit longer, some a bit shorter, but the absolute shortest I've ever been able to get through an exam is 20 minutes, and it's usually half an hour and sometimes more. The next problem is pretending or exaggerating during the exam, and I had 2 people do that this past week. And if you absolutely positively want to guarantee that your disability application will be rejected, pretend or exaggerate. It's extremely difficult to fool an experienced examiner. Many of the things that people who are truly disabled do are counterintuitive. That means they're the opposite of what you would expect. And once exaggeration or pretending is detected, I put that down on the record, and I can almost guarantee that that disability application will be rejected. And some of those people were exaggerating real problems that they actually had, and they might be approved if they were straightforward and honest during the exam. So never exaggerate or pretend. The third problem is something I've talked about before, which is bringing in your medical records or test results such as MRIs. I had a patient get angry at me because I wouldn't look at their MRI, which they had on their phone. I am not supposed to look at medical records or MRI results during the exam, and in fact, only radiologists are qualified to look at MRIs, and the odds are very slim that you will have a radiologist doing your exam. So leave your records and test results at home, but make sure you send copies of them into Social Security. And the fourth problem is my old bugaboo, patients having things stored on their phone. I asked a patient one of the routine questions, and he couldn't remember the answer, but he told me it's on my phone. And then he started scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And I timed him, and at the end of 5 minutes, he still hadn't found what he was looking for. And I told him, time's up, it's time to move on. Folks, if you're going to bring something to show the doctor, make sure that it's stored in an accessible place on the phone. From now on, I'm going to limit phone scrolling to 60 seconds. Next, I had another angry person because they'd applied for disability a year ago and been denied. Note that I hadn't been the doctor who examined them a year ago. The significant thing was this person was under age 50. They'd had a medical problem that left them with a fairly severe problem with one arm and hand. However, if you're under age 50, you must meet a listing to qualify, and the listings are very strict. To qualify for loss of arm or a hand, you must have severe loss of use of both arms and both hands, or both legs, or one leg and one arm. If you're over 50, it's easier to qualify. So this person's under 50, they've got significant loss of use of one arm and hand, but that does not meet a listing and they will not qualify. If you're close to 50, say you're 48 or 49, and you apply and you're denied, it may be worth reapplying when you turn 50 because your chances of being approved are higher. The fifth problem is that VA disability and Social Security disability are completely different systems. You can qualify for partial VA disability if you have tinnitus, ringing in your ears caused by exposure to loud sounds. You will not qualify for Social Security disability based on tinnitus, and there's no point in bringing it up to the doctor because Social Security does not consider it a disability. The seventh problem is disabling conditions that people haven't thought of or forgotten. Almost every time I do a day of disability exams, I discover some sort of problem on a patient that they haven't written down in their application for disability or they haven't mentioned to me in their medical history. This past week, I had a patient who turned out to have an ulnar nerve palsy affecting one hand. The ulnar nerve supplies the feeling to part of the hand and the movement for some of the muscles of the hand. And this patient's ulnar nerve was paralyzed, meaning that they had a partial impairment of use of that hand, and they hadn't even thought to mention that. Again, if you're over 50, Social Security adds up all your conditions and makes a total, and that total determines whether you're approved or not. So even something relatively minor, such as this hand impairment, when added to the other problems this person had, may tip them over the scale between denial and approval. Before you apply for Social Security disability and before your disability exam, think about every single part of your body and if there's any limitation or impairment. And the eighth problem that I've noticed multiple times is that people who actually are seriously disabled often feel guilty about applying for Social Security disability, like it's something to be ashamed of or they're lazy. Folks, you didn't ask to become disabled. You paid in throughout your working life to the Social Security Administration. Social Security disability is an insurance plan. The government knows that a certain number of workers will become disabled each year and that they need to pay their expenses. Just as you wouldn't feel ashamed if your house was destroyed in a fire and you asked your homeowner's insurance company to reimburse you, you shouldn't feel ashamed about applying for Social Security disability if you've become disabled. Finally, somebody who got almost everything right. I've talked before about not talking about your MRIs, not talking about your test results, not using medical jargon or diagnoses. Well, here's how one person who had a less than high school education described one of his major problems. He'd fallen about 6 stories and crushed one of his wrists, and he'd had 3 operations on the wrist, but it still hurt and didn't work very well. That's a pretty much perfect description of what was wrong. When I looked at his wrist, it had healed crooked, it was tender, and it had definite limitation of range of motion. The only way this person could have improved his description of his problems was if he told me, for example, how much he could lift with that arm. Well, I hope this has been helpful, and as always, remember, if it happens, it's possible.